Today, November 18th, we're going to talk about how the Royal Navy started a huge hunt for a German surface raider in the South Atlantic. We'll talk about how Adolf Hitler started bringing the lumber against Italy for supposedly endangering his oil fields. We'll talk about the start of a new offensive by British and Commonwealth soldiers in North Africa against Rommel. We'll talk about how Admiral Halsey got a nice promotion in the South Pacific, and we'll give you an update on the German counteroffensive in Ukraine, Soviet Union, and finally, we'll talk about the just tragic liquidation or the start of liquidation of 18,000 Jews from Hungary. Let's get started. On November 18th, 1939, the German surface raider Graf Spee, which was kind of a cross between a cruiser and a battleship. Germany was restricted after World War One by what they could build and how they could rearm. So they kind of took a cruiser hull and gave battleship armament to this called the Graf Spee that was sent before the war started actually in the South Atlantic. So that when the war started, it was already there and it could start picking off British and Allied shipping. Well, the Royal Navy sent HMS Cumberland, a cruiser, off of to go off of Brazil to enforce or to reinforce the Force G, which consists of a number of cruisers and destroyers that were going to finally hunt down the Graf Spee. So let's face it. So the war started on September 1st, 1939. Graf Spee was already there. This is November 18th. So let's say, September, October, November. So it had 3 months of just picking off, merchant ships right and left until the RN finally got their act together and said, enough, we're going to go out there and destroy this surface raider. Well, I'm not going to get into the detail. If you obviously, the spoiler alert, it did not end well for the Graf Spee. What I would like to end well is if you would go to the subscribe button and subscribe to my channel. I'm giving you daily videos of what happened on that date in World War II. And I like to give a lot of, context to what happened. And so if you like this, if it resonates with you, by all means, please, subscribe to my channel. Thanks a lot. Okay, on November 18th, 1939, Adolf Hitler, called the Italian foreign minister Count Galeazzo Ciano to carpet because he said that it's Italy's disastrous invasion of Albania was to blame for the Royal Air Force supposedly asking and getting permission to station their bombers in Greece to be able to bomb Hitler's main oil source, which was in Romania in the Ploesti oil center. Now, I know it's really hard to imagine that Hitler would lie, but actually, I don't know if it's ironically or enough, but the Greek government actually turned down any request for the British to do anything in Greece. And let's guess why they did that. Well, what do you think? They didn't want to provoke Hitler. Boy, I tell you, it's funny. Here we are, 3 months into a European-wide conflict, open war. Poland had already been invaded and conquered. Czechoslovakia had been swallowed up, and these countries were still other countries were still afraid of provoking Hitler. It's like, well, don't touch the bear, don't poke the bear, and it's like, well, the bear's going to eat you, but it's fascinating to me, just absolutely fascinating. Well, what ended up happening? Well, if you know your history, you know that Greece eventually was invaded by the Germans and it was conquered, and there was a huge amount of suffering that happened there. Hmm. I wonder if maybe it would have been smarter to understand, grasp the concept of a voracious wolf wanting to kill all the sheep. But no, the sheep were out there thinking, well, let's just not poke the wolf and maybe he won't eat us. So it just absolutely blows my mind, boggles my mind how at this stage of the war, there was so much denial about Hitler and what his intentions were. But poor Count Galeazzo Ciano, he had to get taken to the woodshed by Hitler. I don't have too much compassion for the guy. I mean, he was a fascist and he was representing Mussolini, who was no great friend to humanity. So hey, you know what? You lie with the dogs, you're going to get bit. What I would love for you to do right now is to like this video. Liking a video really helps the algorithm. And frankly, I'd love for you to comment as well. If you have any comments about what I'm talking about here, do you have any differing opinions? I love engagement. But listen, I don't mind saying that something if I'm full of crap about something or whatever, just don't be rude about it. That's if you're gonna get obnoxious, and I'm not gonna allow the comment to stay. So just don't even waste your time. But having said that, I do like to engage with people and I do respond to all the comments. So please like and comment this video. Thank you. All right, on November 18th, 1941, the British, New Zealand, and Indian troops launched a major offensive in the North Africa campaign. They launched the offensive from Egypt, which is where the front had stalled. And the whole idea, again, was to liberate. Well, there wasn't much there in Libya. It's all desert mostly. So I would say occupy, drive the Germans out because obviously the Suez Canal was under great danger of the Germans breaking through in Egypt and taking it. So they had to push them back, hopefully destroy it. The problem that the Brits kept having in Libya was there was no natural defenses. You could put like a 10-mile defense against Rommel, General Rommel, and his tanks and his Africa Corps, but he could just outflank it. He just kept outflanking, 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 and the Brits just didn't have the same mobility or means to be able to do that. So they constantly were going back and forth. Ironically, when the Brits did have some advantage, and thankfully the U.S. was, we kept supplying them with more tanks and more trucks and more supplies whenever they got low. Well, they could push them back. And Rommel, on the other hand, consider the farther his attacks went into Libya and towards Egypt, his supply lines got stretched, and he didn't have the infrastructure to be able to keep the fuel going and the munitions and so on and so forth. So there was this back and forth thing since 1940. And this was the Brits' turn. Operation Crusader was the Brits' turn to try to get them to push them back. So today was the first day of that offensive. On November 18th, in 1942, William Halsey was promoted to the rank of admiral in the U.S. Navy. Now, a little bit of background here on Halsey. He was commanding Enterprise in 1941 in the fall, and actually the Enterprise was on a reconnaissance mission south of Hawaii. They were thinking that there could be a possible attack from the Marshall Islands, and so he was there commanding them. So the Enterprise was not at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked, and then after that, Enterprise was sent on some raids against Marshall Islands and to get basically just to get reps of attacking the Japanese and keeping them off balance. Later he was very famous for leading the two carrier task force that had General Doolittle's army bombers that were launched from the carriers and were sent they went to Japan and bombed them, and that was a very major turning point in the war, not militarily, but it provoked Yamamoto, the head of the Japanese Navy, to go ahead and move forward with his attack on Midway later in 1942. So anyway, that's where he got started, and then he was given when Admiral Gormley, who was in charge of the Navy in the Guadalcanal campaign. Nimitz, Admiral Nimitz, who was the head of the Pacific Fleet from Pearl Harbor, he did not like Gormley, thought he was just too pessimistic and too desperate. And so he relieved Gormley and put Halsey in his place. And Halsey did a really good job. I mean, he really got a lot of energy and he was very aggressive. That was his style. So that was a good thing that Nimitz did on naming Halsey to take over that fleet. And of course, he had to become an admiral commensurate with his new responsibilities. On November 18th, 1943, the Germans, General Manstein or Field Marshal Manstein, was doing a counterattack in the southern part of the Soviet Union in Ukraine. And it was interesting, this after Kursk, after the Battle of Kursk in central Russia, it looked like the Soviets were going to just roll because I mean the German army lost about over 1,000 tanks. I mean it was a brutal offensive. The Soviets were ready for them, and they just walked into a trap, and it was just like a bear trap. So, Hitler. Um, relieved the commander and put Manstein in charge. And he was a very aggressive, very mobile. He was in the school of Guderian in uh, when the Germans invaded France. Lots of deep panzer strikes, blitzkrieg, and he did the same tactics. And Soviets still just weren't ready for that, and they got off balance. And he pushed the Soviets back a lot, and basically stabilized the front, the southern front, and saved the Soviets from really making a deep penetration into the Reich. So anyway, and on this date, the Germans had reached Zhytomyr, Ukraine, which obviously Ukraine wasn't an independent country then. It was part of the Soviet Union. So that was a major accomplishment for Manstein. Spoiler alert, he didn't have the means to defeat the Soviet army. It was a tactical victory. It was not a strategic victory. He delayed, an offensive until 1944, but it just was delaying the inevitable. Okay. Well, on November 18th, 1944, just one of the worst days in the history of humanity. Adolf Eichmann, who had been given control of the final solution to liquidate all the Jews, and not just Jews, but Slavs and Gypsies as well. But there was a special attention paid to the Jews, as we all know. And the Germans had been trying to get the Hungarian government to allow them to liquidate the Jews, the Hungarian Jews. And the government had resisted for a long time, but eventually excuse me, uh, the Hungarian government acquiesced, and the Germans sent troops in, and they started the process of deporting 18,000 men, women, and children to Auschwitz, where they all died. Very, very few survived, straight to the gas chambers. And it's ironic because at this time, the Soviet Union was doing their main offensive, and they would liberate Hungary in 1944. So, they were going to be taken over by the Soviets anyway, but they didn't have the guts or the stones to stand up to the Germans even then, knowing that the Germans were going to be gone from their country within weeks or months. But they gave in, and that happened so much in World War II. When push came to shove, and this included Western countries as well, nobody stood up for the Jews. Nobody stood up for them. And it was just it's a blight on humanity about what happened. And we've ever since then we've said never, never again, never again. Look what's happening in Ukraine. Still happening, right? So never again still happens. All right, on that somber note, I'll say thank you again for watching my video to see what happened on November 18th in World War II. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.